You may have seen this because it's been repeated in newspaper after wire story. This piece in the Washington Post by Paul Farhi, F-A-R-H-I. I've been on the radio almost 20 years. This guy writes for the Washington Post. He hears me on WMAL. He's never spoken to me once. Not once. And here's what he writes. And we're going to get to a lot of other things too, but I want to address this just to make a point. Talk radio owner orders conservative host to temper election fraud rhetoric. Then it's picked up by the New York Times at 1:25 p.m. It's picked up by the Atlantic Journal-Constitution. It is spread by Mediaite, which is a hateful left-wing website. Mother Jones, it's pushed there by some guy named Drum. And then the Daily Mail, one of the largest radio companies, tells hosts they will be fired for claiming election fraud. After months of stoking anger about alleged election fraud, writes Paul Farhi, one of America's largest talk radio companies has decided on an abrupt change of direction. Cumulus Media, which employs some of the most popular right-leaning talk radio hosts in the United States, has told its on-air personalities to stop suggesting the election was stolen from President Trump or else face termination. A Cumulus executive issued the directive on Wednesday, just as Congress met to certify Joe Biden's election victory, and an angry mob of Trump supporters marched on the Capitol, overwhelmed police, briefly occupied the building, terrorizing lawmakers and leading to the deaths of 5 people. Of course, 3 people died, just as a footnote, from medical conditions having nothing to do with all this. I just want to point it out. Right-wing media outlets spent significant time on January 6th suggesting that the Trump mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol weren't actually Trump supporters. We need to help induce national calm now, Brian Phillips, Executive Vice President of Content for Cumulus, wrote in an internal memo, which was first reported by Inside Music Media. Cumulus and its program syndication arm, Westwood One, quote, will not tolerate any suggestion that the election has not ended, the election has been resolved, and there are no alternate acceptable paths, unquote. If you transgress this policy, you can expect to separate from the company immediately. A Cumulus representative did not respond to repeated requests for comment on Sunday, so it was leaked by somebody. The new policy is a stunning corporate clampdown on the kind of provocative, inflammatory talk that has long driven the business model for Cumulus and other talk show broadcasters, and it came as Apple, Google, and Amazon cut off essential business services to Parler, the pro-Trump social media network where users have promoted falsehoods about election fraud and praised the mob that assaulted the Capitol. Apple and Google removed the Parler app from the offerings for its smartphones, while Amazon suspended it from its web hosting services. Amazon founder and chief executive Jeff Bezos also owns the Washington Post. Since the election, Cumulus has remained silent, while some of its most popular hosts, who include Mark Levin and Dan Bongino, have amplified Trump's lies that the vote was rigged or in some way fraudulent. On his program Tuesday, the day before the march on the Capitol, for example, Levin fulminated about Congress's certification of electoral votes for Biden, describing the normally routine vote as an act of tyranny. You think the framers of the Constitution sat there and said Congress has no choice but to accept the votes, even if there's fraud, even if there's some court order, even if some legislature has, bear with me, violated the Constitution? Atlanta-based Cumulus owns 416 radio stations in 84 regions across the country. Many of its stations broadcast a talk format, a medium that has been dominated by a conservative point of view for decades. In addition to its national personality, it employs local radio hosts in many of its markets, and it goes on. Then it goes to Talker Radio Magazine guru Michael Harrison, who really didn't do very much to defend people like me. Now, here's the problem. I never got a memo. I never got any memo. Not from Brian Phillips, Executive Vice President of Content for Cumulus. Not from anybody. Nobody threatened me. Nobody told me what I could and couldn't say. Because if they did, you'd be hearing about it. But they didn't. They didn't. I haven't incited anything. I don't promote violence. But the Washington Post has a narrative. Paul Farhi has a narrative. He's also a liar. Paul Farhi should have picked up the phone and called me. And I could have told him right there and then. I never got any memo, but that would destroy his entire narrative, wouldn't it? It would destroy his entire narrative. And not only that, in the print edition, I am told, of the Washington Post, they had my picture. Like I did something, or somebody was admonishing me or something. A complete and utter fabrication. Nobody sent me any memo, and they don't have to send me a memo. We know how to conduct ourselves behind this microphone. Now, Paul Farhi and the Washington Post may not like it. Fred Ryan, who's the boss of the Washington Post, he may not like it. I'm an outspoken constitutional conservative. I point out the hypocrisies and the contradictions. But never, ever do I promote violence or incite violence. If somebody takes my words and twists them, I can't control that any more than somebody might take Bernie Sanders' words and twist them and wind up in an Alexandria, Virginia ballpark shooting congressmen. Absolutely disgusting and corrupt and poisonous, Paul Farhi and the Washington Post. And this isn't the only one. There was a piece not too long ago, a few days ago, where the Washington Post threw me in with the Proud Boys. I don't even know who the Proud Boys are, other than what I read about them. And implied, if not worse, that I had something to do with the death of a man last Wednesday who had a heart attack. Because he was following me on one of the social sites or something, or I have no idea. That I somehow had something to do with a death with a complete stranger who had a heart attack. So you can see the pattern of the Washington Post here, and that's not the only one. How they're trying to libel. That's right, libel yours truly. I have 4 years of broadcasts on our website, marklevinshow.com. 4 years. Now, I'm not falling in line with the view that I have to capitulate to the editorial page of the Washington Post and the New York Times. That's not going to happen, ever. Now, the New York Times, I already put out a statement. Right Scoop asked me, and I told them. Newsbuster asked me, and I told them. But nonetheless, at 1:25 p.m., sometime after I made the point that I never got any memo, here's the New York Times. The talk radio network that airs Dan Bongino and Mark Levin warned staff to stop dog whistle talk. I have no idea what this article is about. Nobody told me to stop dog whistle talk. Cumulus Media, a talk radio company with a roster of popular right-wing personalities, including Dan Bongino, Mark Levin, and Ben Shapiro, has warned its hosts to steer clear of misinformation about election fraud. I haven't been warned about anything, and I don't need to be warned about anything. That's the New York Times, the Holocaust-denying New York Times, the 1776-denying New York Times. Here's Mediaite. Now, this was founded by Dan Abrams. You may see him on some of these cable channels as really a nice guy, you know, talking about whatever, violence in court. And then you see him as an ABC News analyst. He's a leftist. And they hire leftists like this guy, Ken Meyer. Cumulus orders radio hosts, which include Dan Bongino, Mark Levin, to stop pushing election conspiracies. Number one, I don't push election conspiracies. Number two, I don't incite. Number three, I oppose violence. Number four, this is a lie. I never got any memo. And they have a picture of me in my Fox studio in the article. Mother Jones, a commie publication. They have a guy there by the name of Ken Drum, I think his name is, obsessed with me. But this is a hack, left-wing, really over-the-top magazine. Dan Friedman, Cumulus Media has finally had enough. Let our journalists help you make... even the mainstream bits of the right-wing media machine are capable of getting the message eventually, they say. And in the end, they say, if Cumulus can do it, maybe Fox News and all the rest of them can do it too. You got it? They're after talk radio, and they're after Fox News. They have shut down Parler. Parler hopes to be back at the end of the week. They're not going to try and pick off hosts on Fox, pick off hosts on conservative radio by lying about them. Here's the Daily Mail, goes overseas. One of the largest talk radio companies tells hosts they will be fired for claiming election fraud by Holden Walter Warren, whatever that is. Now, these media companies are interfering with my business, tortuously interfering with what I do here. They're interfering with my free speech, and they are libeling me, and I am monitoring them, as are others. They're not going to shut me up under any circumstances. If something happens here or something happens on Fox or something like that, I will have digital TV and I'll have my podcast. But nobody has threatened me. None of them. They're trying to create a controversy where there is none whatsoever. None whatsoever. That's the Washington Post. That's the New York Times. That's the corrupt media in America. It's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace.